The crystal chandeliers in the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom cast prismatic rainbows across the marble floors, where 200 guests mingled in designer evening wear, champagne flutes catching the warm light. The engagement party for my brother David and his fiancée Victoria had cost more than most people's annual salaries. Fresh orchids flown in from Thailand, a string quartet from the city's symphony orchestra, and enough Dom Perignon to float a small yacht. Every detail screamed luxury, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the ice sculptures that would melt into memory by midnight. I stood near the service entrance in my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to job interviews 3 years ago, carefully pressed and paired with modest flats from a discount shoe store. While the other guests sparkled in diamonds and designer gowns, I blended into the background like furniture, invisible to everyone except the catering staff who occasionally nodded at me with professional courtesy. "Darling, everything looks absolutely perfect," I heard my mother's voice carrying across the ballroom as she air-kissed Victoria's mother, both women resplendent in their evening finery. Mom wore her newest Valentino gown, the one she'd bought specifically for tonight's celebration, while her 3-carat diamond earrings caught the light with every animated gesture. "We're so thrilled to welcome Victoria into our family. David has such wonderful taste." Dad stood nearby in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his Patek Philippe watch glinting as he gestured toward the bar setup. "Only the finest for our boy," he boomed to a group of his business associates. "Nothing's too good for David's special day. He's always been our star. Full scholarship to Harvard Business School, youngest partner in his firm's history, now marrying into one of the city's finest families." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, the same tone he'd used at David's graduation, his promotion celebration, his apartment warming party in the penthouse downtown. It was a tone I'd never heard directed at me, not once in my 28 years of existence. David himself stood at the center of the ballroom like a peacock displaying his plumage, his arm wrapped possessively around Victoria's waist as he regaled their guests with stories of their romantic getaway to the Maldives and their upcoming wedding at Martha's Vineyard. His custom Tom Ford tuxedo probably cost more than I spent on rent for 3 months, and his confidence radiated outward like heat from a bonfire. "The wedding's going to be absolutely magical," Victoria gushed to a cluster of her sorority sisters, her engagement ring, a 5-carat emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones, catching the chandelier light as she gestured. David spared no expense. "We've booked the entire resort for the weekend, flying in guests from around the world. It's going to be featured in Town and Country magazine." I remained by the wall, occasionally helping the catering staff when they looked overwhelmed, refilling champagne glasses and clearing empty plates. It wasn't officially my job, but I'd learned long ago that staying busy at family events helped me avoid the awkward conversations about my career situation and my disappointing life choices. "Sweetheart, why don't you grab us some of those canapés?" Mom called to me across the room, pointing toward the past appetizers with the casual expectation of someone addressing hired help. "The ones with the caviar. Victoria's parents will love them." I nodded and moved toward the catering station, weaving between clusters of guests who were deep in conversation about stock portfolios, vacation homes, and their children's acceptance letters to prestigious universities. None of them made eye contact with me. In my simple dress and modest appearance, I was effectively invisible in this crowd of wealth and status. "Excuse me, miss," a woman in a beaded gown stopped me as I balanced a tray of canapés. "Could you direct me to the ladies' room?" She assumed I was part of the catering staff and I didn't bother to correct her. It was easier than explaining that I was the groom's sister, the family member who didn't quite fit into this glittering world of privilege and accomplishment. As I distributed appetizers and refilled drinks, I caught fragments of conversations about David's success, his brilliant career trajectory, and his perfect match with Victoria. Their love story had all the elements of a fairy tale: Harvard Business School sweethearts, a proposal on a private beach in Santorini, and a future that promised continued wealth and social prominence. "David's always been exceptional," I heard my aunt telling a group of Victoria's relatives. "Even as a child you could tell he was destined for greatness. Harvard MBA partnership at 29, now this beautiful engagement. We're so proud of how he's turned out." The unspoken comparison hung in the air like expensive perfume. David was the success story, the child who had fulfilled every parental expectation and social obligation. I was the cautionary tale, the the sibling who had somehow failed to live up to the family's standards despite having access to the same opportunities and resources. Around 9 o'clock, Victoria's parents arrived fashionably late, making their entrance like visiting royalty. Richard Pemberton III was old money personified. His family had owned shipping companies for 4 generations, and his net worth was the kind that appeared in Forbes estimates rather than public records. His wife Eleanor dripped with inherited jewelry and the kind of understated elegance that money couldn't buy, only breed. "David, my boy," Richard boomed, enveloping my brother in a hearty embrace. "You look magnificent. This whole affair is absolutely first class. Your parents have outdone themselves." "Thank you, sir," David replied with the practiced charm he'd perfected in business school. "We wanted tonight to be special for Victoria. She deserves nothing but the best." Eleanor kissed Victoria on both cheeks with the refined affection of someone raised in boarding schools and finishing academies. "Darling, you look radiant. That dress is stunning. Is it Vera Wang?" "Custom Marchesa," Victoria replied with obvious pleasure. "David insisted on flying us to New York to work with their design team personally. He said tonight had to be perfect." As the evening progressed, I continued my invisible service, refilling glasses and clearing plates while the celebrations swirled around me like an elaborate dance I wasn't invited to join. The conversations grew louder and more animated as the champagne flowed, filled with laughter, congratulations, and increasingly elaborate toasts to the happy couple's future. "Ladies and gentlemen," David called out around 10 o'clock, tapping his champagne flute with a silver spoon to get everyone's attention. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." The ballroom gradually quieted as guests turned toward the center of the room where David stood with Victoria, both of them glowing with happiness and champagne. The string quartet ceased playing, leaving only the gentle hum of conversation and the soft clink of crystal glasses. "Victoria and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," David began, his voice carrying easily across the marble floors and high ceilings. "Your presence means the world to us as we celebrate this next chapter in our lives together." Applause rippled through the crowd, punctuated by enthusiastic cheers from David's college friends and Victoria's sorority sisters. I stood near the back of the room holding an empty champagne tray, watching my brother bask in the adoration of 200 of the city's most influential people. "I also want to take this opportunity to introduce Victoria's parents to some of our family members they haven't met yet," David continued, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on me near the service station. A smile spread across his face, not the warm, genuine smile he reserved for people he respected, but the condescending smirk he'd perfected during our childhood whenever he was about to demonstrate his superiority. "Victoria, Richard, Eleanor," he called out, gesturing for them to join him near where I stood. "I'd like you to meet my sister, Sophia." The 3 of them approached with polite smiles, clearly expecting to meet another successful family member who would fit seamlessly into their world of privilege and accomplishment. Richard extended his hand with the confident charm of someone accustomed to making favorable impressions, while Eleanor praised my appearance with the practiced eye of someone who could determine social status at a glance. "Meet the family failure," David announced with theatrical flair, his voice loud enough to carry to the nearby guests who had gathered to witness this introduction. "Sophia here has been exploring her options for the past few years. Still trying to figure out what she wants to be when she grows up." Laughter erupted from the surrounding crowd, not malicious exactly, but the kind of amused chuckling that wealthy people reserve for stories about others' misfortunes. David's business school friends nodded knowingly, having heard similar stories about underachieving siblings who couldn't match their successful brother's accomplishments. "Oh, David," Victoria laughed, swatting playfully at his arm. "You're terrible. I'm sure Sophia is wonderful." But her tone suggested she was merely being polite, going through the social motions expected of someone in her position. Richard's handshake became noticeably less firm as he processed David's introduction, while Eleanor's smile grew more strained. They were clearly recalculating their assessment of the family dynamics, probably wondering how David had managed to excel so dramatically while his sister had apparently achieved so little. "Sophia's been living in that tiny apartment downtown," David continued, clearly enjoying his audience's attention, "working various, temporary positions. We keep telling her she should consider something more stable, maybe administrative work or retail management. Something with a steady paycheck, you know." More laughter rippled through the crowd and I felt my cheeks burning with humiliation. Several guests had pulled out their phones to capture videos of David's speech, probably planning to share highlights on social media later. I stood there holding my empty tray, feeling like an exhibit in a museum of family disappointment. She's always been the artistic type, Mom added helpfully from across the circle, her voice carrying the kind of fond exasperation parents use when discussing children who haven't lived up to their potential. Very creative, very idealistic. We thought she'd outgrow it eventually, but you know how some people are about following their dreams instead of being practical. Dad nodded sagely as if my presence had reminded him of an ongoing family problem he'd been trying to solve. We've offered to help her get settled in something more traditional, maybe accounting or human resources. David has connections at several firms that might be willing to give her a chance, despite her unconventional background. The condescension in their voices was suffocating. Here I was, being discussed like a charity case in front of 200 of the city's elite, my own family painting me as an object of pity and disappointment. The catering staff, I noticed, had stopped their work to listen, probably grateful that someone else was providing the evening's entertainment. Well, Eleanor said diplomatically, everyone finds their path in their own time. I'm sure Sophia will discover what's right for her eventually. Her tone suggested she thought that discovery was long overdue and unlikely to involve anything particularly impressive. David was clearly enjoying himself, basking in the contrast between his own success and my apparent failure. This was his engagement party, his moment to shine, and he had effectively used me as a prop to make himself look even more accomplished by comparison. The thing is, he continued, warming to his theme, Sophia's always been convinced she's going to be special somehow. You know the type, big dreams, unrealistic expectations. Meanwhile, the rest of us are out here in the real world, building actual careers and contributing to society. Victoria's sorority sisters nodded sympathetically, clearly familiar with stories about family members who couldn't get their lives together. Several of David's business colleagues exchanged knowing looks, probably thinking about their own disappointing relatives who had failed to achieve professional success. Maybe she'll figure it out eventually, Victoria said with the kind of charitable optimism that wealthy people display when discussing less fortunate individuals. Some people are just late bloomers, I suppose. The phrase late bloomer hung in the air like a diagnosis. At 28, I was apparently still waiting for some kind of delayed maturation that would finally allow me to join the ranks of productive, successful adults like everyone else in this ballroom. Sophia's always been a bit different, David explained to Richard and Eleanor, as if my eccentricity were a mild mental health condition that the family had learned to manage. Marches to the beat of her own drum, you might say. Never quite understood the value of conventional success or financial stability. As the laughter and condescending comments continued to flow around me, I noticed Victoria pulling out her phone to check something. The conversation had shifted to wedding planning and honeymoon destinations, with David describing their plans for a month-long tour of Europe's most exclusive resorts. We're thinking of starting in Monaco, Victoria said, scrolling through what appeared to be travel websites or social media feeds. David knows people who can arrange private yacht charters and... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on her phone screen with an expression of sudden confusion. The animated chatter around us continued, but Victoria had gone completely still, staring at whatever had appeared on her device. What is it, darling? Eleanor asked, noticing her daughter's distraction. You look like you've seen a ghost. Victoria's eyes flicked from her phone screen to my face, then back to the screen, then to my face again. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all color had drained from her cheeks. Is this you? She asked quietly, turning her phone screen toward me. Is this you on Forbes? The laughter that had been rippling through our circle stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. David, who had been in the middle of describing their planned suite at the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo, fell silent mid-sentence. Richard and Eleanor leaned in to look at Victoria's phone, while the guests who had gathered to witness my public humiliation suddenly focused their attention on the small screen that had somehow shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation. I looked at the phone screen and saw exactly what Victoria was seeing. The cover of this month's Forbes magazine featuring a photograph of me in a sleek business suit, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of a downtown corporate office. The headline read, "The Disruption Queen, How Sofia Martinez Built a $3.2 billion AI Empire in Secret. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Around us, the engagement party continued. String quartet playing, champagne flowing, guests laughing and celebrating. But our little circle had become frozen in time, suspended in a moment of collective shock and disbelief. That's... David started, then stopped, his voice cracking slightly. That's not... Sofia Martinez, founder and CEO of Quantum Solutions. Victoria read aloud from her phone, her voice growing stronger as she processed the information. Age 28. Net worth estimated at $4.7 billion. Named to Forbes' list of America's most innovative entrepreneurs for revolutionary advances in artificial intelligence and quantum computing. More silence. I could see David's mind racing, trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about me, everything he had just told 200 guests about my failures and disappointments. Quantum Solutions went public 6 months ago, Victoria continued reading, with the largest IPO in tech sector history. Martinez's proprietary AI algorithms have revolutionized everything from medical diagnostics to financial trading, with major corporations paying millions for licensing agreements. Richard had gone completely pale, his confident businessman's demeanor replaced by the expression of someone who had just realized he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Eleanor was staring at me with the kind of shock typically reserved for natural disasters or major accidents. This says you've been featured on the cover of Time magazine, Wired and Fortune, Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You were keynote speaker at last month's Global Tech Summit. You own patents worth... She paused, apparently having trouble processing the number, worth over $2 billion. The circle of guests who had been laughing at David's stories about my failures was now staring at me with expressions ranging from bewilderment to horror. Someone's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing across the ballroom like a gunshot. There's a whole article about your company's latest acquisition, Victoria said, still reading from her phone as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. You just bought MedTech Industries for $1.8 billion cash. It says here that you're planning to integrate their research facilities with your AI development programs. David's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. His perfect composure, his confident superiority, his entire identity as the family's golden child was crumbling in real time as the truth of my actual life became undeniable. Sophia, Richard said slowly, his voice carrying the kind of respect he typically reserved for heads of state or fellow billionaires. Is this accurate? I looked around at the faces staring at me. Some shocked, some confused, some calculating the social and financial implications of what they'd just learned. These were the same people who had been laughing at David's stories about my failures just minutes earlier. Yes, I said simply. It's accurate. The two words seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that had fallen over our section of the ballroom. Even the string quartet's music seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. But Mom's voice came from somewhere behind me, weak and uncertain. You live in that little apartment. You take the bus. I live simply by choice, I explained calmly. The apartment is convenient to my downtown office. Public transportation is more efficient than sitting in traffic. Material displays have never interested me much. Dad appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with what I assumed was embarrassment. Sophia, why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you were. I tried, I said, my voice still calm despite the emotional storm building inside me. For 3 years I tried to share what I was working on. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call. You told me I was wasting my time with computer nonsense, and that I needed to get serious about my future. The memory of those conversations hung in the air between us. All the times I'd attempted to explain my research, my business plans, my patent applications. All the times I'd been dismissed, interrupted, or simply ignored while the conversation turned to David's latest promotion or achievement. We didn't understand, Eleanor said weakly, as if lack of understanding somehow excused 3 years of condescension and dismissal. You didn't want to understand, I corrected gently. Understanding would have required listening, and listening would have required believing that I might actually be capable of something significant. Victoria was still scrolling through articles on her phone, her expression growing more stunned with each new piece of information she discovered. "There's a video interview with you on CNBC from last week," she said. "And another one with Bloomberg from last month. How did we miss all of this?" "Because you weren't looking," I said simply. "You decided 3 years ago that I was the family failure, and once you made that decision, you stopped paying attention to anything that might contradict it." David finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Forbes estimates your net worth at $4.7 billion? That's conservative," I replied. "It doesn't include the value of my private holdings or the intellectual property portfolio that's not directly tied to quantum solutions. The actual number is probably closer to $6 billion, but I don't really track it that closely." $6 billion. The number seemed to ricochet around our circle like a pinball, bouncing off shocked faces and confused expressions. For reference, David's annual salary at his prestigious firm was probably around $300,000, respectable by most standards, but a rounding error compared to what I'd built. "Your quantum computing breakthrough," Richard said, clearly trying to process the technical implications alongside the financial ones. "The articles say it could revolutionize everything from cybersecurity to pharmaceutical research." "Among other applications, yes," I confirmed. "We're currently working with 12 government agencies and 43 Fortune 500 companies to implement various aspects of the technology. The medical applications alone could save hundreds of thousands of lives over the next decade." The engagement party continued around us, but our corner of the ballroom had become its own separate reality. Guests were starting to notice the commotion, pointing and whispering as word spread that something significant was happening near the Pemberton family's table. "Sophia," Mom said, appearing beside Dad with tears starting to form in her eyes, "we're so sorry. We had no idea. We're so proud of you." The words I'd wanted to hear for 3 years, finally spoken at the worst possible moment. Pride offered only after public humiliation had made it socially necessary. Love expressed only when silence was no longer an option. "Are you?" I asked quietly. "Are you proud of what I've accomplished, or are you proud of what it means for the family's social status?" The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. If my net worth had been revealed as $50,000 instead of $6 billion, if my company had failed instead of succeeded, if my innovations had been ignored instead of revolutionizing entire industries, this conversation would not be happening. "Both," Dad said finally, with the honesty of someone who had been caught in an indefensible position. "I wish it were different, but both." Victoria's phone buzzed with notifications as news of her discovery spread through social media. People were taking pictures of the Forbes article, sharing screenshots of my company's stock price, posting videos of the moment when everything changed. "There's going to be a lot of attention on this," she said, looking up from her screen with something approaching panic. "People are already posting about it. This is going to be everywhere by tomorrow." He was right. By morning, the story would be viral. Billionaire tech CEO served drinks at brother's engagement party while family called her a failure. The optics were devastating not just for David and my parents but for the Pemberton family as well. They had just publicly humiliated someone who could buy and sell their shipping empire without affecting her quarterly budget. "I should go," I said, setting down the empty champagne tray I'd been holding throughout this entire surreal conversation. "Congratulations on your engagement, David." "Victoria. I hope you'll be very happy together." "Wait," David called out as I started to walk away. "Sophia, we need to talk. We need to figure out how to handle this situation." I stopped and turned back to face him one last time. My brother, who had spent the entire evening using me as a prop in his performance of superiority, now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the revelation that everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics had been completely wrong. "There's nothing to handle," I said. "You introduced me exactly as you see me, the family failure. The fact that your perception doesn't match reality isn't my problem to solve. But people will think." He started, then stopped, probably realizing that what people would think was entirely accurate, that he had publicly humiliated a sister who had achieved more in 3 years than he would accomplish in his entire career. "People will think what they think," I replied. "I can't control that, and honestly I don't care anymore. I stopped caring about your opinion of me the day I realized that your approval was never actually available, regardless of what I achieved." As I walked toward the ballroom exit, I could hear the whispered conversations starting behind me. Guests who had witnessed the revelation were already pulling out their phones, searching for more information about quantum solutions and its mysterious founder. The engagement party would be remembered not for celebrating David and Victoria's future, but for the moment when everything everyone thought they knew turned out to be completely wrong. Outside the hotel, I called my driver. Something I'd started doing 6 months ago when the constant media attention made public transportation complicated. As I waited for the car, I thought about the irony of the situation. I had spent 3 years trying to earn my family's respect through achievement, only to discover that respect offered after public humiliation felt hollow and meaningless. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. The CNBC interview got moved to tomorrow morning. They want to discuss the Forbes cover and the market reaction to your latest patent filings. Should I confirm? I typed back, confirm the interview. And please schedule a meeting with our legal team tomorrow afternoon. We may need to discuss some personal matters that could affect the company's public image. As my car pulled up to the hotel entrance, I realized that tonight had been a gift, though not the kind anyone had intended. For 3 years, I had carried the weight of my family's disappointment, wondering if maybe they were right about my choices and priorities. Now I knew with absolute certainty that their opinion of my worth had never been based on my actual accomplishments or potential. They hadn't seen my success because they hadn't wanted to see it. They had needed me to be the failure in order for David to be the star. My role in the family narrative had been predetermined, and no amount of achievement would have changed that dynamic until external forces made it impossible to maintain. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process what had happened and what would happen next. By tomorrow, the story would be everywhere, dissected and analyzed by business journalists, social media commentators, and anyone who enjoyed watching privileged families implode in real time. David's engagement party, which was supposed to be his moment of triumph, would instead become a case study in how assumptions about success and failure can be completely divorced from reality. Victoria would have to decide whether she wanted to marry into a family that had just demonstrated such spectacular judgment failures in front of 200 influential witnesses. And I would continue building the future I'd been working toward for 3 years, but without the emotional burden of seeking approval from people who had never been capable of offering it authentically. My phone rang as the car pulled up to my building. The caller ID showed David's number. "Hello," I answered. "Sophia." His voice was strained, desperate. "We need to talk. This whole thing tonight, it got out of hand. We can fix this. We're family." "Are we?" I asked quietly. "Because for 3 years I've been trying to figure out what family means to you. Tonight I think I finally understand." "It means we stick together," he said quickly. "It means we support each other. It means we work through problems instead of walking away." Where was that philosophy when I was working 16-hour days to build my company? I asked. Where was that support when I was trying to share my excitement about breakthrough patents and revolutionary technology? Where was that family loyalty when you introduced me as the family failure to 200 people? Silence on the other end of the line. "I know we made mistakes," he said finally. "But we can fix this. We can make it right." "Some things can't be fixed, David," I replied. "Some damage is permanent. Tonight wasn't a mistake. It was the inevitable result of 3 years of choices you all made about how to treat me." "So what happens now?" he asked, and I could hear genuine fear in his voice. "What happens to us? What happens to the family?" I looked up at my building, the tiny apartment that David had mocked, which was actually a penthouse I'd bought for cash because I preferred privacy to ostentation. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I guess that depends on whether you're capable of change or if tonight was just damage control." "Give us a chance," he pleaded. "Give us a chance to show you that we can do better." "I've been giving you chances for 3 years," I replied. "Tonight was your chance to see me clearly without any agenda or ulterior motive. Instead, you chose to humiliate me in front of strangers for entertainment. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." I ended the call and rode the elevator to my penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city's skyline. Down below, the lights of offices and apartments stretched to the horizon, representing millions of people pursuing their own versions of success and happiness. For 3 years, I had built an empire while living in the shadows of my family's expectations. Tomorrow that would change. The Forbes cover had made my success impossible to ignore or dismiss, but it had also made something else clear. The approval I'd been seeking was never worth having in the first place. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from my head of public relations. Twitter is exploding. Hashtag engagement party reveal is trending. The stock is up 12% in after-hours trading. Should we issue a statement? I set the phone aside without responding and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new questions about how to balance public success with private relationships. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely free from the weight of other people's opinions about my worth. The family failure had become a billionaire tech mogul, and the only thing that had really changed was everyone else's willingness to pay attention to what had been true all along. I never expected my 28th birthday to end with my sister trying to have me thrown out of a country club. Then again, I'd stopped expecting anything normal from my family years ago. The Madison Estate Country Club sat on 40 acres of pristine Connecticut coastline, its white columned facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. I'd arrived wearing comfortable jeans and a simple cotton blouse, having driven straight from my apartment in the city. My sister Claire had texted me that morning, "Family lunch at the club. 1 p.m. Don't be late." No mention it was a formal event. No warning about dress codes. Just another setup. I should have known better. Claire stood near the entrance in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her highlighted hair perfectly styled, her jewelry catching the light. Mom was beside her in head-to-toe Chanel, holding court with several other women who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine spread. "There you are," Claire said when she spotted me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've been waiting." The way she emphasized, "we" made it clear I was the problem, not her vague text message. "Sorry," I said easily. Traffic was bad coming from the city. "The city," Mom repeated with a slight sniff. "Still living in that tiny apartment?" "It works for me." Claire's friends had turned to stare, their eyes traveling over my casual outfit with barely concealed disdain. I recognized the look. I'd seen it my entire life from this particular social circle. "Well," Claire said brightly, "shall we go in? I'm absolutely starving." We walked through the grand entrance, my sneakers squeaking slightly on the marble floors. The country club was everything you'd expect. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of long-dead members. Old money attempting to preserve itself in architectural form. "The Thompson party," Claire announced to the hostess with the air of someone who expected to be recognized. "Of course, Miss Thompson. Right this way." We were led to a table near the windows overlooking the golf course. Beautiful view. Perfect setting. And I was dressed like I'd just come from running errands. Which, to be fair, I had. "So," Mom said once we were seated, not bothering to look at me as she perused the wine list. "Claire has some exciting news." "Do tell," I said, genuinely curious. Claire practically glowed. "Richard proposed." "Congratulations," I said warmly. "That's wonderful. We're having the engagement party here next month," she continued, gesturing around the room. "And the wedding will be here too, of course. This club is perfect. Very exclusive. Very." She paused, her eyes landing on my outfit. Refined. "It's a beautiful venue," I agreed. "Yes, well, we're very fortunate to have memberships here," Mom said. "Your father's business connections made it possible, though Claire and Richard's status certainly helps maintain our standing." The implication was clear. I contributed nothing to the family's social position. "Richard's family has been members for 3 generations," Claire added. "His grandfather was on the board of directors." "Impressive," I said, meaning it. "Unlike some people," Mom said pointedly, "who can't even manage to dress appropriately for a family lunch." I took a sip of water. "You said family lunch. You didn't mention it was formal." "Any lunch at the Madison estate is formal, dear. One would think that's obvious." Our waiter arrived, saving me from having to respond. We ordered. Claire chose the lobster, Mom the Dover sole, I went with the chicken salad, and then the real performance began. "We're planning the engagement party for 60 guests," Claire announced. "All the right people, naturally. Richard's business partners, our closest friends, family." "Sounds lovely," I said. "Of course, we'll need to be selective about the guest list," Mom interjected. "The club has standards." We can't just invite anyone. I knew where this was heading. Which reminds me, Claire said, her voice taking on an apologetic tone that didn't quite reach her eyes. About the engagement party. We're really trying to keep it intimate. Just our inner circle. I understand, I said calmly. Do you? Mom asked. Because last time we had a family event you showed up looking like, well, like this. That was Thanksgiving, I reminded her. At your house. You said casual. Casual doesn't mean impoverished, Claire said with a little laugh, gesturing at my outfit. Honestly, Emily, you're 28 years old. When are you going to get your life together? My life is together, I said evenly. Living in a studio apartment, working at. Mom trailed off with a vague wave of her hand. Whatever it is you do with computers. Data analysis. Yes, that. She said it like I'd admitted to working at a fast food restaurant. The point is, dear, you're not exactly where we hoped you'd be at this age. Claire was already engaged to Richard at 26 and look at her now. A beautiful home in Greenwich, a successful fiancé, memberships at all the right clubs. I'm happy for Claire, I said honestly. But not ambitious for yourself, Mom finished. It's disappointing, Emily. Your father would be disappointed too. Bringing up my father who'd passed away 3 years ago was a low blow. But it was Mom's specialty. I think Dad would be proud of me, I said quietly. For what? Claire asked with genuine curiosity. What have you actually accomplished? I could have told them right then. Could have explained exactly what I'd been building for the past 6 years. Could have shown them the documents in my bag that proved just how accomplished I actually was. But I'd learned something valuable about my family. They never listened. They'd already decided who I was, and no amount of evidence would change their minds. At least, not evidence presented by me. I'm doing fine, I said instead. Our food arrived and for a few minutes we ate in relative silence. Then Claire's phone buzzed and she squealed with delight. Oh my God, Mom, look. The Hendersons can make the engagement party. And they're bringing the Vanderbilts. Wonderful, Mom said beaming. This is going to be the event of the season. We'll need to upgrade the menu, Claire mused. Maybe the filet mignon instead of the salmon. And champagne, obviously. The good stuff. Spare no expense, Mom agreed. This is a celebration of Claire's future. I continued eating my salad, letting their planning wash over me. I'd become quite good at tuning out these conversations over the years. Of course, we'll need to be careful about the seating arrangements, Claire said, pulling out her phone to make notes. The Vanderbilts can't sit with the Prescotts. You know they're in that legal dispute. And Richard's mother will want to be near the windows. What about family seating? Mom asked. Oh well, Richard's parents at the head table with us, obviously. His siblings at table 2 with their spouses. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia at table 3. I waited but my name never came up. Where should we put Emily? Mom finally asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather not put me anywhere at all. Claire looked up from her phone, her expression one of carefully constructed sympathy. Actually, Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Here it comes, I thought. The thing is, Claire continued, with limited space and so many important guests, I'm not sure we can accommodate everyone we'd like to invite. You're not inviting your own sister to your engagement party? I asked calmly. It's not that simple, Claire said quickly. It's just, this is a very important event for Richard's career. His business partners will be there, potential clients, people from his firm. We need to make the right impression. And I would make the wrong impression, I finished for her. Don't be dramatic, Mom said. Claire is simply being practical. This party could lead to important connections for Richard. We can't have. She gestured at me again. This being your daughter, I said. This being someone who can't be bothered to dress appropriately or maintain proper social standards, Mom corrected. Really, Emily, look at yourself. You're at one of the most exclusive country clubs in Connecticut wearing jeans and sneakers. You haven't made any effort to fit in with our social circle. You work some computer job that no one understands, you live in a tiny apartment in the city, you drive that horrible old Honda. It's reliable, I said. It's embarrassing, Claire snapped. Do you know what Richard's mother said when she saw you get out of it at Christmas? She asked if you were the hired help. Did you correct her? Eventually, Claire said. But the damage was done. She thinks our family is struggling. I almost laughed. Almost. So, the solution is to not invite me to family events? I asked. Just this one, Claire said quickly. Just the engagement party. You can still come to the wedding, obviously. We'll seat you in the back somewhere. How generous, I said dryly. Don't be like that, Mom said. We're trying to help you understand how the world works. Appearances matter. Connections matter. You can't just show up looking like you don't care and expect people to take you seriously. I never said I didn't care, I pointed out. Then why do you dress like this? Claire demanded, her voice rising slightly. Other diners were starting to glance our way. Why do you insist on living in the city instead of somewhere respectable? Why do you work at some no-name company doing God knows what? I like my job, I said simply. You could like it somewhere better, Mom said. Somewhere that would impress people. Claire's fiancé works at Whitmore and Associates. Very prestigious. Very well connected. They have connections too. I know who they have connections to, I interrupted gently. Then you understand why this engagement party is so important, Mom said. Why we can't have any complications. Complications. That's what I'd been reduced to. I understand perfectly, I said. Good, Claire said, visibly relaxing. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. And really you'll probably be more comfortable not coming. These events can be so boring, all that small talk with people you don't know. I know most of them, I said quietly. You know of them, Mom corrected. That's different from actually being part of their circle. Which you're not. The waiter came to clear our plates and offer dessert menus. Mom and Claire ordered the crème brûlée. I declined. Now, Claire said, pulling up something on her phone, let me show you my ideas for the table settings. I'm thinking white roses and gold accents. She launched into an elaborate description of her party plans while Mom nodded approvingly and offered suggestions. I sat quietly, my water glass leaving a ring of condensation on the white tablecloth. This was how it always went. Me sitting on the sidelines while Claire and Mom discussed Claire's perfect life, Claire's perfect plans, Claire's perfect future. I'd long ago stopped trying to participate in these conversations. They didn't want my input. They wanted an audience, someone to witness and validate Claire's success. The fact that I was the sister being excluded was just a bonus. And the photographer Richard hired has shot weddings for 3 governors, Claire was saying. He's incredibly expensive but worth it for the publicity shots. Publicity? I asked despite myself. Well, yes, Claire said as if it were obvious. Richard's law firm is very prominent. Our engagement will likely be mentioned in the society pages. We need professional quality photos. Of course, I murmured. Which is another reason we need to be selective about who appears in them, Mom added pointedly. We'd moved past subtle and straight into blatant. The waiter brought their desserts, and they discussed the wedding plans between bites of crème brûlée. Venue capacity, invitation wording, honeymoon destinations. All the details of a wedding I apparently wouldn't be welcome at. Finally, lunch wound down. Mom requested the check, made a show of reviewing it carefully, and then pulled out her credit card with a flourish. High treat, she announced. A celebration of Claire's engagement. Thanks, Mom, Claire said, kissing her cheek. Emily, Mom said as we stood to leave, perhaps next time we have a family meal, you could make an effort with your appearance. For Claire's sake, if not your own. I'll keep that in mind, I said neutrally. We walked toward the exit, Mom and Claire chatting animatedly about wedding dress shopping next week. I followed a few steps behind, the invisible sister. We were almost to the entrance when Claire stopped suddenly. Oh, she said brightly. There's Melissa Harrison. I have to say hello, she's on the wedding invite list. She hurried over to a woman in tennis whites, leaving Mom and me standing near the marble fountain in the foyer. Emily, Mom said quietly, turning to face me. I hope you understand we're not trying to be cruel. We're trying to protect Claire's future. This marriage is important for our family's standing. I understand, I said. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if you really grasp how serious this is. Richard comes from old money. Real money. His connections could open doors for all of us. But only if we present the right image. And I'm not the right image, I said flatly. Not currently, no, Mom admitted. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you just make an effort, better clothes, a more impressive job, perhaps meet someone from a good family, things could be different. I'm happy with my life, I said. That's because you don't know what you're missing, Mom said with something almost like pity. You've settled for so little that you think it's enough. But Emily, you could be so much more if you'd just try. Before I could respond, Claire returned, flushed with excitement. Melissa's coming to the party, she announced. And she's bringing her husband who just made partner at his firm. Richard will be thrilled, they could really use those connections. Wonderful, dear, Mom said warmly. We continued toward the exit, but as we approached the doors, Claire suddenly grabbed my arm. Actually, she said, her voice taking on a new edge, I just realized something. What? I asked. You can't leave through the main entrance dressed like that, she said, gesturing at my outfit. People might think you're, well, not a member. Claire, I said quietly, I am a member. You. She laughed. Emily, do you have any idea what membership costs here? It's $150,000 initiation fee alone, plus $15,000 annual dues. You can barely afford your studio apartment. She's right, Mom said. It's embarrassing enough that you showed up looking like this. Let's not compound it by having you exit through the main doors. Use the side entrance. I stared at them both. You want me to leave through the service entrance? Just this once, Claire said. Please? I don't want anyone to see you and think. Think what? I asked, my voice still calm. That we're. Claire trailed off, searching for the right word. Poor, Mom supplied bluntly. If people see you dressed like that leaving through the main entrance, they'll assume we're not actually the kind of members who belong here. A small crowd had started to gather in the foyer. I recognized several faces. Other members, club staff, people who moved in the same social circles as my family. Perfect. I'm not leaving through the service entrance, I said clearly. Emily, Claire hissed, glancing around nervously. Don't make a scene. I'm not making a scene, I said. I'm leaving through the front door like any other member. Any other member wouldn't be dressed like a vagrant, Mom said sharply. That's when Claire made her mistake. She turned to the security guard standing near the entrance, a professional-looking man in his 50s with a club security badge. Excuse me, she said in her most authoritative voice. Could you please remove this poorly dressed person? She's embarrassing us. The security guard looked at me, then at Claire, confusion crossing his face. Ma'am, She doesn't belong here, Claire continued, her voice getting louder. More people were stopping to watch now. Look at her. She's clearly not member material. We can't have people like this wandering around the club. Claire, I said quietly, don't do this. Why not? She demanded, turning on me. You're making us look bad. You're always making us look bad. For once, could you just accept that you don't belong in places like this? Mom nodded her agreement. The security guard is just doing his job, Emily. Perhaps if you dressed appropriately, this wouldn't be necessary. The security guard looked deeply uncomfortable now. Ladies, I'm not sure. Remove her, Claire insisted. Immediately. I'm a member here and I'm requesting that this person be escorted out. The foyer had gone quiet. 20 or so people were watching now, their country club lunch interrupted by unexpected drama. I stood calmly waiting. That's when David Morrison appeared. David was the club's director, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd managed the Madison estate for over 20 years. He'd clearly been summoned by someone who recognized that this situation was escalating beyond a simple security matter. What seems to be the problem? He asked smoothly, his voice trained to diffuse conflicts among the wealthy. Finally, Claire said. Mr. Morrison, thank goodness. This person, she gestured at me, needs to be removed from the premises. She's not dressed appropriately and she's causing a disturbance. David looked at me and I saw recognition flash in his eyes. Then something else. Alarm. Miss Thompson, he said carefully, is there a problem? This is Miss Thompson, Claire said impatiently, pointing at herself. I'm Claire Thompson and this is my mother, Patricia Thompson. We're members here. This, she gestured at me again, is my sister who is not a member and needs to leave. David's expression didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense. I see, he said slowly. And you're asking me to have your sister removed from the club? Yes, Claire said. Immediately. Before she embarrasses us further. She's dressed like homeless person, Mom added. It's completely inappropriate. Surely you can see that. David turned to me and in his eyes I saw a question. I gave him the slightest nod. Miss Thompson, he said, and there was a new quality to his voice now. Formal. Professional. Shall we revoke their memberships? The foyer went completely silent. Claire's face went blank with confusion. What? I said, David repeated calmly. Shall we revoke their memberships? Mrs. Patricia Thompson and Ms. Claire Thompson, according to our records, are sponsored members under the primary membership. What are you talking about? Claire demanded. We've been members here for years. My father. Your father's membership was transferred 5 years ago, David said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through something. Upon his passing, the primary membership and all associated accounts were transferred to the designated heir in his will. Mom had gone pale. That's impossible. I have the membership card. I've been paying the dues. You've been using the membership privileges, David corrected. But the primary membership belongs to someone else. Someone who has been covering all costs associated with this club for the past 5 years, including your dues, your dining charges, your guest privileges, and your access to all facilities. The crowd was pressing closer now, people pulling out their phones. Who? Claire whispered, though I could see in her eyes that she was starting to understand. David turned to me with a respectful nod. Miss Emily Thompson has been the primary member since 2019. She owns the membership that you've been using. And actually, he scrolled through his phone again, she owns quite a bit more than that. What do you mean? Mom asked faintly. The Madison Estate Country Club was purchased by Thompson Holdings LLC 3 years ago, David explained. Ms. Emily Thompson is the sole owner of Thompson Holdings. Which means, Mrs. Thompson, that your daughter doesn't just own the membership you've been using. She owns the entire club. The silence was deafening. Claire's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Mom gripped the back of a nearby chair as if she might fall over. That's impossible, Claire finally managed. Emily is. She's a data analyst. She lives in a studio apartment. She drives a Honda. Miss Thompson maintains a private residence in the city, David said carefully. But she also owns 3 properties in Connecticut, including the estate where this club is located. As for her vehicle choices, that's a personal preference. The entire club? Mom whispered. 40 acres, the main building, all facilities and the adjacent golf course, David confirmed. Purchased in 2021 for $47 million. The transaction was handled very quietly, as Miss Thompson preferred to maintain her privacy. I'd stayed silent through all of this, watching my family's faces as their entire understanding of reality crumbled. Emily. Claire turned to me, her voice small. Is this true? Yes, I said simply. But, how? Why didn't you tell us? You never asked, I said quietly. You assumed. You decided I was a failure, that I hadn't accomplished anything, that I was an embarrassment to the family. Nothing I said would have changed your minds, so I stopped trying. But the apartment, Mom said weakly. The job. The car. I like my apartment. It's a convenient location for work. The job is actually the data analysis firm I founded 6 years ago. We handle financial modeling for investment firms. And the Honda is reliable. I don't need to impress anyone with my car. 6 years ago, Claire repeated. You've been successful for 6 years and you never told us? I tried, I said. Remember when I invited you to my company's launch party? You said you were too busy. When I mentioned I'd bought a property in Connecticut, you assumed I meant a condo and made jokes about my starter home. When Dad died and left me the club membership, you thought it was a pity gesture because I couldn't afford my own. The truth was settling over them now, cold and undeniable. Every time you've complained about paying dues here, I continued, my voice still calm, I was actually paying them. Every meal you've charged to the membership, every guest you've brought, every club event you've attended, I was covering all of it. I've been covering all of it for 5 years. Why? Mom asked, and she actually sounded hurt. If you could afford all this, why live the way you do? Why let us think? Because I wanted to see if you loved me, I said quietly. The real me. Not the version you wanted me to be, not someone who impressed your friends, just me. And I got my answer. Claire was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Emily, You tried to have me thrown out, I said not unkindly. You told security to remove me because I embarrassed you. You uninvited me from your engagement party because I didn't fit your image. And Mom, you told me Dad would be disappointed in me. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I interrupted gently. You meant every word. Because to you I was a failure. Someone who settled for less, who didn't try hard enough, who wasn't good enough for your social circle. David was still standing there, professional as always, but I could see sympathy in his eyes. Miss Thompson, he said carefully, your instructions? This was it. The moment where I could revoke their memberships, ban them from the club, cut them off from the social circle they valued so highly. The ultimate revenge. But as I looked at my mother's pale face and my sister's tears, I felt nothing but tired. Their memberships continue, I said. For now. But I want it noted in the records that they are sponsored members only. They have no authority to make decisions about club policy, membership, or guest access. And they certainly don't have authority to have anyone removed from the premises. Understood, David said with a slight bow. I'll update the records immediately. Wait, Claire said desperately. Emily, please. I'm sorry. We're sorry. We didn't know. You didn't care, I corrected. That's different. You didn't care who I actually was or what I'd accomplished. You only cared about how I made you look. The engagement party, Claire said quickly. You'll come, right? Please? I'll seat you at the head table. I'll tell everyone. I don't want you to tell everyone anything, I said. I came here today for a family lunch because, despite everything, I still hoped we could just be family. But you made it clear that's not possible unless I fit your requirements. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. Isn't it? I asked. When was the last time you asked about my life without judgment? When did you last show interest in my work, my home, my choices without criticizing them? When did you treat me like someone worth knowing instead of someone to be managed? They had no answer. The club is yours to use, I continued. I'm not going to take that away from you. But I'm done pretending to be less than I am so you can feel superior. I'm done apologizing for not meeting standards you never bothered to understand. I turned to David. Thank you for handling this professionally. Of course, Ms. Thompson. Will you be staying for your usual afternoon tea? Not today, I said. But please put their lunch on my account. Wait. Claire called as I walked toward the door. Your engagement party. I stopped and turned back. Send me an invitation. If you want me there as your sister, as someone you actually value, I'll consider coming. But if I'm just supposed to be decoration for your perfect event, save yourself the trouble. I walked out through the main entrance, my sneakers squeaking on the marble one last time. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices starting up again, phones undoubtedly capturing every moment for the society gossip networks. By tomorrow, everyone in my family's social circle would know the truth. My phone buzzed as I reached my Honda. A text from David. Your office sent over the quarterly reports. Membership is up 15% this quarter. The renovations you approved for the tennis courts are already attracting new applications. Well done, Ms. Thompson. I smiled and put the phone away. I'd bought the Madison Estate Country Club 3 years ago not as an investment, but as a gift to myself. A reminder that I'd succeeded on my own terms, built something real, created value that had nothing to do with my family's approval. The fact that my family had been using it all along, never knowing who actually owned it, was just irony. As I drove away, my phone rang. Claire. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom called. Then Claire again. They'd call for weeks, I suspected. Apologizing, explaining, trying to rebuild what had been broken. Maybe they'd mean it. Maybe they'd really see me differently now. But I'd learned something important today. Their opinion of me had always been conditional. Conditional on my success looking the way they expected it to look, on my life fitting their definition of achievement, on my choices making sense to them. And I was done living conditionally. I had a data analysis firm to run, properties to manage, and a life that made me happy even if it didn't impress anyone. That was enough. As I merged onto the highway back to the city, I thought about my father. He'd built his membership at that club through hard work and determination, never quite fitting in with the old money crowd but earning their grudging respect. In his will, he'd left it to me with a simple note. For Emily, who never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. He'd known somehow what I'd face from the rest of the family. And he'd given me the tools to handle it. The membership stayed active because I wasn't my mother or my sister. I didn't measure worth in social standings or revenge. But the records would show the truth now, and that truth would follow them every time they used the club. They'd have to live with knowing that the daughter they'd dismissed, the sister they'd tried to remove, owned the very ground they walked on. That seemed like consequence enough. The monthly family dinner at Mom's house had always been a delicate balance of unspoken tensions and forced pleasantries, but tonight's gathering carried an electric undercurrent that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way my sister Jessica strutted through the front door 23 minutes late, her designer Hermes bag swinging from her manicured shoulder like a battle flag, or how she immediately commandeered the conversation with breathless tales of her absolutely life-changing Vegas experience, without bothering to acknowledge anyone else's existence. I'd been sitting quietly at the familiar dining room table, mechanically working through Mom's overcooked pot roast while listening to the usual family dynamics play out around me. Dad dominated discussions about his golf handicap improvements. Uncle Mike regaled everyone with stories from his construction business that nobody particularly wanted to hear. Mom fussed over every minor detail of the meal preparation like she was hosting foreign dignitaries instead of the same relatives who gathered here every third Sunday of the month. "You literally cannot imagine the suite they gave me," Jessica announced, sliding into her usual chair directly across from me with theatrical flair. Top floor of the Bellagio, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the fountain's 24-hour champagne service, Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was absolutely divine. Mom's face transformed into that particular expression of maternal pride she reserved exclusively for Jessica's accomplishments, real or imagined. "My successful daughter deserves nothing but the finest things in life." I continued cutting my meat into precise, uniform pieces, saying nothing. At 29 years old, I'd developed an almost scientific understanding of family dinner dynamics. Silence was survival. Questions led to comparisons. Comparisons led to humiliation. Better to maintain my role as the invisible family member who occasionally contributed polite murmurs of agreement when directly addressed. Jessica was the golden child, the marketing manager with the impressive-sounding job title at a mid-tier advertising agency, the Instagram-perfect lifestyle carefully curated to project success and sophistication. She possessed that particular type of magnetic personality that commanded attention in every room she entered, the kind of effortless confidence that made people assume she must be important simply because she acted like she was. I was the other daughter. The boring government employee who lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Arlington and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from a grocery store parking lot incident I'd never bothered to repair. My wardrobe consisted entirely of conservative business attire purchased from department store clearance racks. My social media presence was non-existent. My accomplishments, such as they were, remained largely invisible to my family because they'd never bothered to ask about the specifics of my work. "Jessica, tell them about the shopping expedition," Dad prompted eagerly, refilling her wine glass to the brim while my own sat conspicuously empty. The stories she was telling me earlier were incredible. Jessica's green eyes lit up with the fervor of someone about to deliver her favorite performance. "Oh my God, the shopping situation was absolutely insane. I spent something like $22,000 over 3 days. Completely new wardrobe from boutiques that don't even display prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Custom jewelry from this designer who works exclusively with celebrities. Spa treatments that cost more per hour than some people make in a week." I felt like an actual celebrity the entire time. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. $22,000. On a marketing manager's salary that I knew from previous family conversations, topped out around $60,000 annually before taxes. The mathematics didn't compute, even accounting for credit card debt or savings depletion. "How exactly did you manage to afford all that?" I asked quietly, immediately regretting the question when every head at the table swiveled toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. The temporary silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. Jessica's laugh carried a sharp metallic edge that reminded me unpleasantly of fingernails on chalkboard. "Wouldn't you just love to know the details, little sister? Some of us have figured out how to actually live life instead of merely existing in beige monotony." Uncle Mike nodded with the sagely approval of someone who'd never met a platitude he couldn't embrace wholeheartedly. "Jessica's always had real ambition, real drive. Not like certain people who seem perfectly content with boring desk jobs that lead absolutely nowhere. The familiar sting of family disapproval washed over me like ice water. They'd never understood my career choice, never bothered to investigate what my boring government job actually entailed. They knew I worked for some branch of the Treasury Department, something that involved computers and extensive paperwork. They found it mind-numbingly dull, thoroughly unimpressive, certainly nothing that could compare to Jessica's dynamic marketing career with its client lunches and creative campaigns. Speaking of terminally boring careers, Jessica continued, clearly warming to her favorite theme, how's your little government paper-pushing situation progressing? Still shuffling forms around in some windowless office somewhere. It's going well, I responded automatically, falling back on the neutral responses I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. Well, she repeated with exaggerated incredulity. Jesus Christ, could you be any more pathetic? Don't you have any ambition whatsoever? Don't you want to accomplish something meaningful with your life instead of wasting away in bureaucratic obscurity? Mom immediately jumped into the conversation with her characteristic enthusiasm. Jessica just received another promotion opportunity. Senior Regional Marketing Director position. She'll be managing accounts worth millions of dollars and supervising a team of 12 creative professionals. Jessica preened under the attention like a peacock displaying its plumage. Meanwhile, certain people are apparently still struggling to make ends meet on entry-level government salaries at the advanced age of nearly 30. I wasn't quite 30 yet, but correcting Jessica's timeline would only invite more ridicule. I'd learned through painful experience that factual corrections were interpreted as defensive behavior, which encouraged further attacks. The real difference, Jessica continued, leaning forward conspiratorially like she was about to share state secrets, is that I've developed multiple income streams. Smart investment opportunities, cryptocurrency portfolios, strategic financial moves that your average government drone wouldn't possess the sophistication to understand or execute. He was lying. I could detect deception in her body language with the practiced eye of someone whose professional responsibilities included interrogating financial criminals. Jessica's eyes shifted slightly left when she fabricated stories, her voice pitched half an octave higher than normal, her gestures became more animated to compensate for the lack of genuine conviction behind her words. But my family had never learned to read Jessica's tells. They absorbed her elaborate fictions with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for her childhood fairy tales. After dinner concluded, I dutifully helped Mom clear the dishes while Jessica held court in the living room, regaling everyone with increasingly elaborate Vegas anecdotes. Each story seemed to feature higher dollar amounts, more exclusive venues, more celebrity encounters that probably existed only in her imagination. As I loaded the dishwasher with mechanical efficiency, I noticed Jessica's oversized purse sitting open on the kitchen counter, positioned carelessly next to the coffee maker. Her leather wallet was clearly visible, stuffed thick with what appeared to be an unusual number of credit cards. Too many credit cards for any reasonable person to carry. I recognized several of them immediately. The distinctive blue Chase Sapphire Preferred card that I'd applied for 18 months ago specifically for its travel rewards program. The sleek silver Capital One Venture card with its unique geometric design pattern. The red Bank of America card that I kept exclusively for emergency situations. My stomach dropped as the terrible realization crystallized. Those were my credit cards. In Jessica's wallet. Being carried around like trophies. Find something particularly fascinating? Jessica's voice made me jump violently. She'd materialized in the kitchen doorway with the silent grace of a hunting cat, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Those are my credit cards, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Prove it, she replied with a smirk that contained absolutely no trace of shame or guilt. I could have provided immediate proof. I knew every account number by heart, could recite the 3-digit security codes from memory, had the monthly statements saved on my phone with detailed transaction histories. But I also understood with crystalline clarity that evidence wouldn't matter here. Not with this audience, not in this house where Jessica's version of reality always took precedence over objective facts. Why? I asked instead, genuinely curious about her psychological reasoning. Jessica shrugged with practiced nonchalance. You never actually use them for anything interesting. They just sit there collecting dust while you live like some kind of financial monk who's afraid to spend money on anything beyond basic survival necessities. I figured I'd put them to productive use for once in their miserable existence. That's theft, I said simply. It's borrowing. From family. God, you're so fucking dramatic about everything. She grabbed her purse with deliberate casualness and sauntered back to the living room, where I could hear her launching into yet another fabricated tale about private gambling rooms and complimentary bottle service. I remained in the kitchen, hands trembling slightly as I retrieved my phone and accessed my banking applications. The financial damage exceeded my worst-case scenario projections. All 3 credit cards had been systematically maxed out with surgical precision. The Chase Sapphire Preferred, with its $15,000 limit, showed a current balance of $14,847. The Capital One Venture card reflected $9,923 against its $10,000 limit. The Bank of America Emergency Card had been pushed to its absolute maximum of $8,000. $32,770 in fraudulent charges. All originating from Las Vegas. All processed over the previous weekend. I walked back toward the living room on unsteady legs, my phone clutched in my sweating palm like a piece of incriminating evidence. Jessica was displaying photographs on her iPhone to an appreciative audience. Images of the luxury suite, shopping bags from boutiques I couldn't pronounce, herself posing with cocktails that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. Jessica, I said quietly, interrupting her narrative about a private shopping experience with a personal stylist. We need to discuss something important. We're already discussing something, she replied without bothering to look up from her phone screen. About the credit cards. The living room fell silent with the abrupt finality of a theater curtain dropping. Jessica finally raised her eyes to meet mine, her expression shifting from casual amusement to sharp-edged annoyance. What about them? You stole them from my apartment. You committed credit card fraud. You need to immediately pay back every cent you spent. Jessica's laugh was harsh and ugly, devoid of any genuine humor. Or what, exactly? You'll run crying to mommy? You'll call the big bad police. I could feel the family's collective attention focusing on me with the intensity of stage lights, and their expressions told me everything I needed to know. Not concern about Jessica's criminal behavior. Not sympathy for my position as a victim, but irritation that I was disrupting the evening's entertainment with my petty complaints. Maybe you should have kept better track of your personal belongings, Dad said with the air of someone delivering Solomon-like wisdom. This situation is partially your responsibility for being careless with important financial instruments. She took them directly from my apartment, I said. She used the emergency key I gave her 3 years ago when she was going through her divorce. Family members help each other during difficult times, Mom added with the tone of someone explaining basic moral principles to a confused child. Jessica will obviously reimburse you when her financial situation stabilizes. With what money? I asked. She just spent $32,000 that she doesn't possess. Jessica stood up abruptly, her face flushed with wine and righteous indignation. You want to know what your real problem is? You're pathologically jealous. You're consumed with bitter jealousy because I know how to embrace life while you just exist in your pathetic little gray world of rules and limitations. The room murmured collective agreement. Uncle Mike nodded with the gravity of someone who'd just witnessed profound truth being spoken. Aunt Linda made sympathetic clucking noises about the tremendous stress of Jessica's demanding career. $32,000, I repeated, as if the specific number might somehow penetrate their willful blindness. I maxed out your cards in Vegas, Jessica laughed triumphantly, pulling the crumpled receipts from her purse and waving them above her head like battle flags. What's a broke loser gonna do? The family erupted in spontaneous applause. Dad raised his wine glass in an impromptu toast to Jessica's boldness. Mom clapped her hands together with genuine delight at her daughter's spirited defiance of conventional limitations. I looked around the room at these people who were theoretically bound to me by blood, who were supposed to love and protect me, who should have been outraged by what had been done to me. Instead, they were celebrating my victimization, cheering for the person who had robbed me, treating financial crimes like entertaining dinner conversation. I said calmly, I'll file the report. The laughter continued unabated. They interpreted my statement as an empty threat, the desperate bluffing of someone who lacked any real power or authority. Jessica wiped tears of mirth from her carefully made-up eyes. File whatever pathetic paperwork makes you feel better, she said dismissively. Who's going to believe your sad little story? Who's going to care about some nobody government drone claiming her successful sister stole her credit cards? I didn't respond to her taunts. I gathered my coat and purse, said goodbye to absolutely no one, and drove through the darkness back to my modest apartment in Arlington. Once there, I sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop computer and began composing a detailed report that would change everything. What my family didn't know, what they'd never bothered to inquire about despite 6 years of employment, was the precise nature of my boring government job. They understood that I worked for the Treasury Department in some capacity, but they'd never asked which specific division. They knew my daily routine involved extensive computer work, but they'd never questioned what exactly I was investigating. I was a senior criminal investigator for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, commonly known as FinCEN. For the past 6 years I'd been tracking money laundering operations, bank fraud schemes, credit card fraud rings, and sophisticated financial crimes that crossed state and federal jurisdictional boundaries. My specialty was following digital money trails through complex international networks, identifying patterns that revealed criminal enterprises, and building prosecutable cases against financial criminals who thought they were untouchable. Jessica had just committed multiple federal felonies against a federal law enforcement officer whose specific expertise involved prosecuting exactly these types of crimes. The incident report took me nearly 3 hours to complete with the thoroughness it demanded. I documented every relevant detail: the theft of the physical credit cards from my apartment using Jessica's retained emergency key, the precise dates and amounts of each fraudulent transaction, the admissions of guilt she'd made in front of multiple witnesses, her refusal to provide restitution, her explicit acknowledgement that the charges were unauthorized. I attached comprehensive supporting documentation: screenshots of my banking records showing the fraudulent charges, photographs of the receipts she'd displayed as trophies, a detailed timeline of criminal activity, witness contact information for everyone who'd been present during her confessions. By Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., the case had been officially assigned to a specialized team of federal agents who handled financial crimes against federal employees. Not local police officers who might be persuaded to treat this as a family dispute, not state investigators with limited resources. Federal agents with unlimited jurisdiction and the authority to make arrests anywhere in the United States. Jessica's Las Vegas spending spree had crossed multiple state lines, involved numerous financial institutions headquartered in different states, and violated several federal banking regulations simultaneously. The charges would include credit card fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a federal employee, and interstate transportation of stolen financial instruments. The investigation proceeded with the mechanical efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Jessica had been remarkably sloppy in her criminal methodology, leaving a paper trail that a first-year forensics student could follow. She'd used the stolen cards at dozens of Las Vegas establishments, always signing her own name instead of attempting to forge my signature, never making any effort to conceal her identity or disguise her activities. Her confidence in her own invulnerability had made her careless. My immediate supervisor, Deputy Director Martinez, called me Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. "This case is obviously personal," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question that required an answer. "It's also unambiguously criminal," I replied. "Do you want to recuse yourself from the investigation? Let another agent handle the prosecution." I considered the option for approximately 5 seconds. "No, sir. I can maintain complete professional objectivity. This situation is going to become extremely complicated when your family realizes who you actually are." He was absolutely correct. When the arrests happened, when the family finally understood that their boring government drone was actually a federal law enforcement officer with the authority to pursue felony prosecutions, the dynamics would shift dramatically. Wednesday afternoon at 2:33 p.m. my personal phone rang. Mom's contact photo appeared on the screen. "Honey, something absolutely terrible has happened to Jessica. Men in dark suits came to her office this morning. They arrested her in front of all her colleagues and clients. They mentioned bank fraud and federal charges. This has to be some kind of horrible mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said calmly. Extended silence. "Then, what do you mean it's not a mistake?" I mean, I filed a comprehensive report with the appropriate federal authorities regarding the theft of my credit cards and the subsequent fraudulent financial transactions. You actually called the police on your own sister? I contacted federal law enforcement regarding multiple felony crimes that were committed against me. Federal law enforcement? Mom's voice sounded faint and distant. Sweetie, what exactly do you do at your job? I'd been waiting 6 years for someone in my family to ask me that specific question. I'm a senior criminal investigator for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Mom. I investigate bank fraud, money laundering, credit card fraud schemes, and other financial crimes that fall under federal jurisdiction. What Jessica did to me represents a textbook case of interstate credit card fraud. The silence stretched so long I began to wonder if the call had been disconnected. You're actually a federal agent? I'm a federal criminal investigator with arrest authority. I've held this position for 6 years. But you always said you worked with computers and paperwork. You said your job was boring administrative work. I investigate complex financial crimes using computer forensics and extensive documentation. I never described my work as boring. You and the rest of the family decided it was boring without ever asking for specific details. Another protracted silence punctuated by the sound of Mom's labored breathing. Can you make this situation go away somehow? No, Mom. I cannot make federal felony charges disappear through personal intervention. Jessica committed credit card fraud across multiple state lines, stealing from a federal law enforcement officer. She's potentially facing up to 20 years in federal prison. Mom began crying audibly. But she didn't know. She didn't know what your job was. She knew she was stealing from me. She knew she was committing fraud. My specific employment doesn't make theft more or less illegal under federal statutes. But she's your sister. And I'm the federal agent she committed multiple felonies against. Thursday morning brought another call, this time from Dad at 7:42 a.m. The lawyer Jessica hired says she's in extremely serious legal trouble. Real serious. He says the federal prosecutor assigned to her case is pushing for maximum sentences on all charges. That assessment sounds accurate. You have to help her somehow. You have to talk to your colleagues, explain the family situation. I cannot and will not attempt to interfere with an ongoing federal investigation. But you work with these people. You know how the system operates. Dad, I am these people. I'm the primary investigating officer. I'm the victim of record. And I'm the federal agent who built the criminal case against Jessica. The words seemed to impact him like physical blows, each revelation hitting harder than the last. You're the one who did this to her? She did this to herself when she chose to steal $32,000 from me. She was planning to pay you back eventually. With what money? She doesn't possess $32,000. She was never going to provide restitution. She made a mistake. People make mistakes. Federal felonies aren't mistakes, Dad. They're conscious criminal choices with serious legal consequences. Friday evening brought the emergency family intervention. They assembled at my apartment like a tribunal. Mom, Dad, Uncle Mike, Aunt Linda, my younger cousin Trevor, who usually avoided family drama with religious devotion, and even my grandmother who'd driven 3 hours specifically for this confrontation. We need to have a serious conversation, Mom announced when I opened the door, her tone suggesting I was about to receive a lecture on moral obligations and family loyalty. I let them file into my small living room, prepared coffee for everyone who wanted it, and settled into my reading chair to wait for the inevitable arguments. You have to find a way to drop these charges, Dad began without preamble. Jessica made some poor decisions, but she doesn't deserve to spend decades in federal prison. I cannot drop federal charges. That authority doesn't exist within my jurisdiction. You're being vindictive and cruel, Uncle Mike accused with the righteousness of someone who'd never been robbed by a family member. You're using your government position to punish Jessica for being more successful than you. I'm enforcing federal law without regard to personal relationships. She's family. Mom pleaded with genuine desperation. You don't send family members to prison over money. You don't steal from family members either, I replied. And this isn't simply about money. It's about multiple federal felonies. So you're choosing your career over your own family? Aunt Linda asked with obvious disgust. I'm choosing legal justice over criminal behavior. The arguments continued for nearly 3 hours. They pleaded with increasing desperation, threatened social ostracism, attempted emotional manipulation, and delivered guilt trips with professional skill. They accused me of jealousy, vindictiveness, cold-hearted ambition, and betrayal of fundamental family values. They painted Jessica as the unfortunate victim of my petty revenge fantasies and bureaucratic power abuse. Not once during the entire confrontation did anyone acknowledge that Jessica had committed serious crimes against me. Not once did anyone suggest that Jessica bore primary responsibility for her own criminal actions. Not once did anyone express concern for how I felt about being robbed by my own sister. The local news stations are calling about interviews, Trevor said quietly. He was the only family member who hadn't actively attacked my character. They want to do a story about the federal agent who prosecuted her own sister. Everyone stared at me with accusation and horror in their eyes, as if I'd somehow orchestrated media attention for personal aggrandizement. This publicity is going to destroy our family's reputation in the community, Mom said with obvious anguish. People will think we're a family of criminals. Jessica is a criminal, I said. She committed multiple federal felonies that are documented with overwhelming evidence. Because of your vindictive prosecution. Dad exploded with rage. If you hadn't pressed charges, none of this nightmare would be happening. If Jessica hadn't stolen from me, none of this would have been necessary. The trial was scheduled for 3.5 months later. Jessica's defense attorney, a competent criminal lawyer named Robert Kim, attempted every possible legal strategy. He argued that Jessica had believed she possessed implied permission to use the cards. He suggested that family financial disputes shouldn't involve federal law enforcement. He claimed that I was abusing my official position for personal vengeance. He portrayed Jessica as the victim of an overzealous prosecutor who couldn't separate professional duties from family grievances. None of these arguments could overcome the physical evidence. Credit card transaction records showing unauthorized use across multiple states. Surveillance footage from Las Vegas casinos and retail establishments clearly showing Jessica making purchases with my stolen cards. Witness testimony from the family dinner where Jessica had openly admitted to the theft and refused to provide restitution. Her own receipts, which she'd preserved as souvenirs of her criminal spree. The federal prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chin, presented a methodical case that painted a clear picture of premeditated fraud committed against a federal law enforcement officer. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Chin told the 12 citizens during her opening statement, the defendant didn't simply steal credit cards from a victim she perceived as powerless. She stole them from someone whose professional responsibility is investigating exactly these types of financial crimes. She was so confident that her victim couldn't or wouldn't seek justice, so certain that family relationships would protect her from legal consequences, that she kept the receipts as trophies. She bragged about her crimes to multiple witnesses. She showed complete contempt for federal banking laws and the authority of federal law enforcement. Jessica's defense attorney tried to portray me as the real villain in this situation, the cold, calculating sister who'd destroyed her own family for the sake of career advancement. Agent Thompson had options, defense attorney Kim argued during his opening statement. She could have resolved this as a private family matter. She could have arranged a payment plan, sought family counseling, pursued civil remedies. Instead, she chose to unleash the full power of federal law enforcement against her own sister. She chose her badge over her blood, her career over her family. When I took the witness stand, Kim attempted to undermine my credibility with questions about proportionality, family loyalty, and abuse of governmental authority. Agent Thompson, don't you believe that 20 years in federal prison represents grossly excessive punishment for what your sister viewed as borrowing money from family? Mr. Kim, federal sentencing guidelines exist to ensure consistent application of justice regardless of personal relationships. Credit card fraud is a serious federal crime whether it's committed by strangers or family members. But surely you could have resolved this situation through private negotiation? A structured payment plan, perhaps. The defendant stole $32,000, showed no remorse for her actions, possessed no means to provide restitution, and expressed no intention of attempting repayment. Private resolution was not a realistic possibility. Did you consider the devastating impact that prosecuting your sister might have on your family relationships? I looked directly at Jessica, who was sitting at the defense table with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she appeared genuinely frightened rather than angry or defiant. "Mr. Kim, my family relationships were already devastated. They were destroyed the moment my sister decided that stealing from me was acceptable behavior because she perceived me as weak and powerless. They were further damaged when the rest of my family chose to celebrate her criminal actions instead of supporting me as the victim of those crimes." The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes before returning unanimous guilty verdicts on all counts: credit card fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a federal employee, and interstate transportation of stolen financial instruments. Jessica received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The presiding judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, explained her reasoning with crystalline clarity. "Ms. Thompson, your crimes were not committed from desperation, financial necessity, or mental incapacitation. They were committed from pure greed and arrogant assumption of immunity from consequences. You stole from your own sister, someone who had trusted you with access to her home and personal belongings. You showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and no intention of providing restitution. Most significantly, you committed these federal crimes against a law enforcement officer, demonstrating complete disregard for federal authority and the rule of law. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your criminal choices and the need to deter others who might believe family relationships exempt them from legal accountability." The family's reaction was entirely predictable. At Jessica's sentencing hearing, Mom stood up and screamed at me across the federal courtroom. "She was your sister. How could you destroy your own sister like this?" I wanted to scream back, "How could she rob her own sister?" But I maintained the professional composure that had served me throughout my career in federal law enforcement. After the sentencing concluded, I returned to my apartment and poured myself a generous glass of wine. My phone had been ringing constantly throughout the day. Reporters seeking quotes, family members delivering ultimatums, co-workers offering support or asking procedural questions. I ignored every call and sat quietly in my living room, reflecting on the previous 8 months of legal proceedings. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied by the outcome. I felt tired, sad, and emotionally drained. I'd lost my family connections, but I'd preserved my integrity and professional ethics. I'd enforced federal law without favoritism, but at enormous personal cost. My supervisor called that evening at 9:47 p.m. "How are you holding up after today, Thompson?" "I'm managing adequately, sir." "No, you're not managing adequately. Nobody could handle this situation without significant emotional impact. I'm ordering you to take accumulated vacation time." "That's not a request. I'd prefer to maintain my normal work schedule." "I know you would prefer that. Which is exactly why I'm making this mandatory. Take 3 weeks minimum. Go somewhere restful. Let the media attention dissipate." "That's a direct order." I took 3 weeks and drove alone to the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. No internet connectivity, no cellular service, just hiking trails and clear mountain air that helped clear my head. When I returned to Washington, the news cycle had moved on to other stories and controversies. Jessica served 5.5 years of her 8-year sentence before being released to a federal halfway house. She never contacted me during her incarceration, never apologized for her actions, never acknowledged that her criminal choices had consequences beyond my vindictive prosecution. The extended family occasionally attempted to guilt me into visiting Jessica in prison or contributing money to her commissary account. I declined all such requests without explanation. 4 years after the trial concluded, I was promoted to Assistant Director of FinCEN's Criminal Investigation Division. The case that had destroyed my family relationships had simultaneously established my reputation as an investigator who couldn't be intimidated, corrupted, or compromised by personal relationships. I never married, never had children of my own, never rebuilt the family connections I'd lost. But I constructed something else. A distinguished career devoted to protecting innocent people from exactly the types of financial crimes that had been committed against me. Sometimes, late at night in my government office reviewing complex case files, I wonder if I made the optimal choice. If there was some middle ground I failed to consider, some alternative approach that could have held Jessica accountable without destroying every family relationship I'd ever known. But then I remember her standing in that living room, laughing while waving those receipts like victory banners, asking what a broke loser, like me, could possibly do about her theft. I remember my family cheering her criminal behavior, celebrating her boldness, dismissing my victimization as irrelevant drama. I remember the moment I realized that the people who were supposed to love and protect me had chosen instead to enable and celebrate the person who'd hurt me most. That's when I know with absolute certainty that I made the correct choice. Not the easy choice that would have preserved family harmony, not the choice that avoided conflict and maintained comfortable illusions, but the morally and legally correct choice. The choice that demonstrated federal law applies equally to everyone, regardless of blood relationships or family dynamics. The choice that established criminal behavior has serious consequences, even when committed by people we love. The choice that affirmed I was worth protecting, even if I had to protect myself from my own family. Jessica learned that family relationships don't provide immunity from federal prosecution. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you thought mattered most. But it's still the right thing, and I would make the same choice again without hesitation.